Hello, and welcome to Movies We Dig, the podcast about film, antiquity, and everything in between. I'm Colin McCormick.
I'm Elijah Fleming.
And I'm Christy Vogler.
And today we're uncovering a film which likely needs no introduction. The 1981 action-adventure directed by Steven Spielberg, written by Lawrence Kasdan, created by George Lucas and Philip Kaufman, and starring Harrison Ford. I am, of course, talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark. And today we are very excited. We're joined by two super special guests, two professional Egyptologists and hosts of the Afterlives podcast. We're joined by Kara Cooney and Jordan Galczynski. So Kara, Jordan, thank you so much for coming on the show. We're really happy to be talking with you.
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us. Super exciting.
Yes. So we usually start with our guests. So we'll start with you two. And our first question is always, do you dig this movie? And what is your kind of relation to Indiana Jones?
Well, I'm going to start because I'm older. I grew up with this movie. This movie, I think I'm older than anybody here. I was born in 1972 when, VHSs hadn't been invented yet. And I remember when we got the first VHS player in my house and we would tape things off of TV with commercials in it and everything. Mm-hmm. And we would play it again and again. And this was one of those movies for us. So Raiders is a movie that I have lines memorized too. I use in everyday conversation. Jordan was funny and she's like, just in case you don't remember, she sent me a synopsis of the plot. And I was like, oh, look at that plot. Huh.
Okay. That was the sound of thud thuds as Jordan got thrown under the bus.
Yeah, thanks, Kara. I was trying to be nice.
She's always trying to prep me, which is not a stupid thing to do. And and I love this movie, but when you see something as a child, it's like listening to a song that's all about sex, and then you're 27 and you go, oh my God, that song's all about sex. Mm-hmm. So it's taken me a while to revisit this and take my childhood out of it. So that's where I'm coming from.
I'm going to say it's complicated. And I think for the same reasons as Kara, I grew up watching all these movies. I can't tell you how many times I've seen all the Indiana Jones movies. My parents really like them. But I think growing up wanting to be an archaeologist and Egyptologist, the movie I related more to, perhaps rather than Kara with Raiders, was more The Mummy. So Raiders always felt a little older. And then I think it wasn't until when I didn't, see myself in Indiana Jones, he's a male, all these things, where at least in The Mummy, I saw myself kind of in Evie, being the clumsy librarian and all this kind of stuff.
You guys, Jordan just called me old.
Well, I'll set a breakout room on the site so you two can hash it out. And then...
I think we figured out last weekend that you could be my mom.
Oh, totally. And you have just made me like your parents, so that's all good. Tell them I said hi.
One of my students accused me of being like a millennial, which would for them meant old. When I used the word spoopy in lecture one day, and they're like, "That's the most millennial shit I've ever heard."
By the way, are we allowed to curse on this?
Yes.
Oh yes, go ahead,
please. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Just good to know.
You didn't want to say anything.
No, you're fine.
You needed to put that in there. It's really fun.
Yeah, I had it on my paper. Ask if we can curse.
I want to actually pivot because Christy, I think you have a very similar reaction, and also Christy, this is your first, not to put you on the spot or anything.
Yep, last night was the first time I watched this film.
Wow.
Oh my God.
Very similar to Jordan, I grew up with Mummy, which I absolutely love, but I also grew up with Tomb Raider. I remember going to drive-through movie with my middle school girls soccer team and watching that and being like, well, she's badass and I like her. So I have to say, at the end, it's I did not dig this movie because there's so much nostalgia to it that other people have that I went into it with The Mummy, and we talked about Lost City not too long ago, where I feel better versions of this action adventure archaeology films that's what I grew up on or got to see recently, that this one was just, it ends up falling flat, but I can recognize all the memes and all the line. It's not as if I wasn't aware of this movie. I just never had sat down and watched it. Mm-hmm. And I think the other part is I've been to Disneyland once in California, and my mom was super upset because my brother and I were too short to go on the brand new Indiana Jones movie or ride, and she had to watch us ride Dumbo 5 times while everyone else went on that. And so there's a
Dumbo is where it's at.
Yeah, it was great. So there's a touch of bitterness about the movie in my family for some reason.
For some reason, I have strong memories of the Wind in the Willows ride always freaking me out. But
you go to hell. in that one. You actually get to go to hell. You die, you get hit by a train, and you go to hell.
What?
Yes, you remember that from Wild Toad Adventure, whatever? Yeah, a train comes out, or a car, I don't know. You die, and then you actually go into... It's the best ride. It's really awesome.
Or you just ruined everyone's childhood.
So yeah, Christy coming in with what we in the business call fighting words, and I'm going to pivot to Eli, and then...
So I did grow up with this movie because my mom loved this movie. She saw it in theaters. She grew up in Southern California. She went to see all the big movies coming out, and she introduced me to a lot of the old classics. Like, she sat me down, made me watch Star Wars when I was young, and so she was like, this movie, you're gonna watch Indiana Jones. And I think she like saw something. She's like, this girl is crazy and wants to dig holes in the yard, so okay, archaeology, let's try that. And here's where we ended up. So I definitely have huge nostalgic feelings for this movie, and I think weirdly enough, it never bothered me that I didn't see myself as a woman in Indiana Jones. It was just like, oh, well, I'm gonna do that. And it never bothered me that I had this male figure that I was like, well, I'm obviously going to do that with, running around the ship and punching Nazis and all of etc. But I do remember, and Christy was there for this, on the first excavation that Christy and I worked together on in Gange Vecchio, our professor said, they're digging in the wrong place. And it just brought up this like absolute joy of like physically actually doing the thing and hearing someone else say that and bring in that story. And it has meant so much to me. So I think it's delightful, and I absolutely recognize, watching it again last night, just some cringe moments that I absolutely did not notice as a child.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was gonna say, I took in undergrad, I took a class on Orientalism, and he showed so many clips from this movie, and then I was like, oh. Light bulbs went off, like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Like, this movie, as much as we talked a lot about nostalgia sort of for the five of us, because in like you, I grew up watching. I have very clear memories of being on long family car trips, and we would do this thing where like we had this minivan, we could flip the middle seat around, and we set up like a little mini TV and a VCR player in the car, and like me and my siblings like squished like three in the back, watching Raiders sort of in the car. Like, that might have been the first time I saw this movie. But they had like nostalgia, but and like how much of our fond memories, Christy aside, are rooted in nostalgia. But this movie itself is actually like born out of nostalgia, right? Because it's sort of modeling itself after the like adventure serials of the 30s and 40s that George Lucas and Spielberg kind of grew up on. And so it has like even in 1981, it was kind of like inherently nostalgic. But the sort of flip side is that sort of, and we all have been alluding to, that kind of uncritical and maybe a little bit retrograde attitude towards archaeology, colonialism, artifacts, and what, or where they do and do not belong, things like that.
But it's super fitting to look at all the inappropriate stuff and think of, professors like Gary Urton, and it's brought up exactly and if you don't know who Gary Urton is, he's a known sexual harasser and maybe worse at Harvard, and lots of things have been written about him. But to see that this actually happened with the underage daughter of one of his colleagues, and that's Miriam, and what all of that means. And as a child, you don't get that. And then when you're in the profession and these things are happening around you, we can look at this and have some modernist exceptionalism and feel like we're past it all, but we're really not. And so I think looking at this movie from a critical lens of what academic and museum society is all about, it's no bad thing to kind of take it in.
In early drafts, it was even worse, like, because there was the bit with the student where she's got like the "I love you" on her eyes. Yep. But in early drafts, like, so in the scene where Marcus goes to Indiana Jones's house after they meet with like the CIA guys or whatever, in the original draft there was like a student or he had like a mistress or somebody over, which is why like in that scene when they go to toast, there's an already open bottle of champagne right there on the table, and it's like a holdover from like and like why Indy's in like a dress robe.
I didn't know that. You've blown my mind. And ew.
Mhm.
So ew.
Yeah,
But
very.
like also this like goes towards the not accurate archaeologist trope because like that doesn't happen.
Yes.
Yes, it does.
No one's like
Dig sex
like
happens. People don't talk about it, or they do. They do talk about it.
well,
but,
yes, but like not that like we're all a bunch of Harrison Fords walking around.
Well, some self-style that way.
A lot of big directors like to think they're a bunch of Harrison Fords walking around.
Yeah. I have always really like aligned Indiana Jones with James Bond in that way, in that he's this like very hyper masculine, but like so much so that it seems almost comical, that it's unrealistic at that level.
It's actually like when the conception for this movie was basically Star Wars. It was opening weekend, and George Lucas does this thing where when his movies come out, he like goes on vacation because he doesn't want to be around to like and he just waits for the box office returns. And so he went to Hawaii with Steven Spielberg, and they were like hanging out at the beach. And he asked Steven Spielberg, like, what are you thinking on next? And Steven Spielberg says, I always wanted to do James Bond. And George Lucas says, I'll do you one better. I've got this idea. His name is Indiana Smith. And then he pitches Raiders. And his name was originally Indiana Smith. But Steven Spielberg was like, no, I hate that. But it was kind of, but yeah, Eli, like totally right. Like it's almost like it's such a uber, like the masculinity read on this whole film is like, it's so over the top that it almost becomes like a parody of itself. And you could like, I think you could do like an ironic reading of, the machoism of Indiana Jones.
With everyone, with the CIA, with the Nazis, with the academics, museum people, it's great. With the Egyptian, it's all there. Of course, the Orientalizing of Salah, that's something we can discuss too. But he does take on a different role.
Yeah.
Yes.
And also, the original casting for Salah, before it was John Rhys Davis, the 6'3" like Welshman or whatever, was originally going to be Danny DeVito because they wanted like a more like almost like Benny from The Mummy, like something more in that dimension of like kind of like a cringy, like goofy comic relief type. And then
that's even more Orientalist.
Yes.
That freaks me out, Colin. Why?
I will say that like our introduction to, is it Miriam? Because my subtitles kept saying Marion.
Marion.
Oh, it's Marion.
It is Marion. Okay.
Marion. Yeah. Right.
Okay. Our introduction to her is in Nepal, and she's running her own bar, and she's showing that she belongs to that space by out drinking the men. And like, to me, that was something that rang very true about my experience in archaeology of this being, it's a fraternity in a lot of ways.
Yep.
And like, archaeologists, you go to conferences and stuff, that's what you hear about them. It's like they're party animals, and
it's so true.
Have questionable relationships with grad students. But like that moment of her knowing the way she needs to belong is by out drinking the men around her. It's like, yeah, I've experienced that on a lot of sites where you have to prove your masculinity to belong, even though predominantly so many women, especially at those lower as workers or maybe trench leaders, all those lower positions are filled mostly by women. And then you just have like the director who's a male or something like that. And so that moment spoke to me.
You bring up this great point of archaeologists needing to be cool and at home in foreign places. So she's in Nepal. When she gets to Egypt, she puts on Egyptian dress. They're like, it's dates, you eat them, and everything's all. And we do this, don't we? We go to the places, the weird places at the ends of the earth, and we're like, oh yeah, this is just normal. Though we really dig that, and we love that unusual experience. There is so much of that in this movie that speaks to me and my love of travel and different things, and then immersing myself in those spaces.
I was just going to say, I feel snobby as an archaeologist, admittedly, because like when I travel somewhere, it's like I live and work there for weeks at a time. And it's like I see cruise ships come on and just spurt a bunch of people out. And then they get back on a few hours later. It's like, that is not how you travel.
Yeah, you're like, I'm not a tourist. I know better. Yeah.
I know things.
Yeah. There is something on that, like very having that exclusive access somehow and that information. And I wonder if we're all just sort of, I don't know, a little bit dramatic. We want to get into those behind the scenes places. I certainly do. I think that definitely was part of my early like interest in doing archaeology. It's like, ooh, not a lot of people do this.
And you
Yeah.
literally, you get to go be, on the other side of the fence, right? Like you get to be in, one of the cooler things. By full confession, I am not an archaeologist. I am a literary studies people, but having sort of gone abroad where they take you and like you get to go in whatever it is, the Parthenon. Like nobody gets to go in here. You get to go underneath the Temple of Nike or something like that. And there is like an exclusivity to the craft, which in both the kind of travel and sort of ingratiating yourself in whatever it is you're working, that, and like just physically getting to go into spaces that people don't go, like this exclusivity that exclusiveness is appealing, right? That's like creates an in club. Everybody's nodding, listeners.
Yes.
Yes. Well, and I think too, the allure of the movie, and I think of archaeology when we're younger, is like finding mysteries, finding something new that's been like lost for thousands of years, and it has this, allure to it. And in the movie, right, we're looking for this lost ark and taking us on this journey. So, in most cases, when you're actually on an archaeological dig, you don't find anything but, potsherds or something, or you find something cool like the very last day of the dig, as it always goes. You're not finding lost arks or gold or anything.
And it's so true. If you find something awesome, the authorities are going to come in and they're going to take that shit away. You don't get to study it and look at it. The more precious and special it is, faster it goes into a museum, the more famous something is. I always say there's nothing more understudied than, until recently, Tutankhamun's treasures, because they're so famous that they're always under glass and they're never under a microscope and people don't know anything about them.
Yeah. This actually is because they say something to the effect of like when they're talking about the Ark of the Covenant, they're like, this is why we got into archaeology, like this idea, this is the dream. And so I guess like the question that I'm kind of formulating is this movie's, and we all talked about this movie is a landmark sort of watershed for people being interested in archaeology and Egyptology and fields like that. And I'm sort of, the question I'm trying to kind of pose is like the relationship, like our modern popular culture's relationship to these kinds of academic fields. How much of it is Indiana Jones like a crystallization of our attitudes, or is it the root cause, is what I'm kind of getting at. Everybody's looking thoughtful and pensive.
No, we've since the discovery of, before Tutankhamun, you had the discovery of the great death pits of Ur, and before that you had the discoveries have been pretty fast and frantic since colonialism has gone into spaces and taken things and then brought them back to their world fairs and their great museums. I think the cool thing here is like finding something that's mythical. In this case, the Ark of the Covenant, and the third movie, the Holy Grail. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous that one person would find both of these things. That people do work on Grail lore. I mean, it's like putting your D&D nerdiness together with actually finding something. But it's cool that, when somebody goes into a museum and we see the newbies that we're making fun of, the people from the cruise ship, they go into a museum, they look at something, they walk away, and you're like, you didn't even look at it. You didn't look at the object. You're not doing analysis of the thing. And when you actually, that's one thing I like about the movie is, you see Indiana Jones, we'll make fun of him, fine. But, he's looking at things with a detailed eye that is underneath a piece or over to the side or someplace that the normal person wouldn't look. And it's what we all do. So, yeah.
I like that view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say, but to me, I guess I view him a little bit more with a different intention. It seems very much like his personal, like, collecting.
He's looking at it to steal it. You are right.
Yes, exactly. And it's like gold and my money and I found it. It's not, oh, look at this object and what like knowledge it will contribute to the field, and I'm going to bring it to this museum so everyone can look at it and learn about it.
And there's a part at the very beginning after the very iconic opening scene in Peru where Belloc takes the idol from him at the, he steals the idol and then Belloc steals it from him. And then he's talking to Marcus and then he's like, I had it, I was this close. And he's like, I got these other pieces. And Marcus says, well, of course we'll buy it from you. No questions asked, which was like, whoo. Oh yeah. I know it's the 30s, but.
Like that still goes down. Antiquities and modern art, these are places to launder large amounts of cash for states to pay each other huge amounts of money in the plain light of day. So one could argue it's even gotten worse.
Yeah, and every it seems like every couple of years or so there's a story of, the Met will return X thing to wherever it, because it's a sort of illegal providence, or also places like Christie's and Sotheby's are huge vectors Again, everybody's nodding.
I hate that I'm named. I share a name with Christy.
Yeah.
I will say that to me was one of the, maybe what turned me off. It was the most unrelatable aspect of Indiana Jones, of like the intentionality of going to places to find a particular object.
Yes.
That is not my experience at all. My experience is like, I wrote a prospectus thinking like, we might find this and therefore this is what I might argue, and then proceeding to find nothing along those lines and completely changing, what I was looking for. But like that to me is what is exciting, is like, you don't know what you're actually going to find.
Howard Carter knew, though. Howard Carter knew what he was going to find. He knew which kings were missing. He knew what their names were. He knew what locations to look in. And he had all kinds of, he dug here, he dug
clues.
there.
He had
He's
clues.
like, okay, we're going to go here.
Yeah.
He kind of knew. And sometimes he did know.
Here's actually a question for the archaeologist, which is actually just kind of like, because normally, as I understand it, as sort of an outsider to the field, is that, you know sort of where sites are, and then you sort of see what's there and what's uncovered. But like, how often do you get a case like King Tut's tomb or Troy or something like that, where somebody sets out, or Mycenae, somebody sets out where it's like, I'm going to find the lost city of, whatever it is. Because, I mean, it feels to me like a thing from the turn of the century.
Yeah, I mean, you always get those recent news things where they're like, found Cleopatra's tomb or Alexander's tomb, or they're looking for another pharaoh, and they, use all this hype, and it turns out to be nothing, or dates to that time period. So maybe it could be.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's a 1 in a million type event, I would say. But that's what everyone knows about, is those events, not.
And I feel like the kind of people who are really into that kind of stuff are, in effect, kind of conspiracy theorists. Like, I have a very clear memory of being at like a party or something, and some guy who was like the friend of a friend who went on this like 20-minute rant about like his theory of where Alexander the Great's tomb was. And I was like, all right, like, cool, I guess.
Well, I like Belloc at one point when they're in Egypt. I think it's Belloc. He says archaeology is not an exact science. And I have like two very different feelings about that, because like, sure, I think what we have all said is like, you can create a sort of research plan and go dig at a site and it be nothing like what you thought. And you sort of, we always have to work with the data that we have. And so, extrapolating from the stories that we make up, however, Schliemann decided to, call the different places of Troy, it's like we can only ever really work with what we have. Mm-hmm. But on the other side of that, it's like, well, Schliemann did find Troy, and like we did find Tutankhamun's tomb, and like there are these places out there. And so it's like, is archaeology an exact science, you guys?
I'm okay with this way of Indiana Jones and his sidekick, the museum dude whose name I forget, but they go in to get things to bring to the museum in a 1920s, 30s, 40s world. That is on point. Sure. That is what people did. That's why they invested in it. That's why they would spend their winters there and try to get things to bring back to the Met, to bring back to the British Museum, to sell, to make money. This is part of that game, and to put it into that lens, I think it's correct. It's right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's wrong.
We talked about this when we were talking about The Mummy, which is the Mummy similarly can kind of have its cake and eat it too, where you get this kind of treasure hunter-y thing, but it's also like kind of, it works because it's set in the 20s or something like that. Yeah, and
I view The Mummy as, I find, much more satirical. Mm-hmm. So it's poking a lot more fun, not like the Rider Haggard novels and stuff, where Indiana Jones I don't read as that satirical at times.
When he
a little
says
bit,
the museum will buy it as usual, I mean, don't you think that's kind of I mean, it's totally a dig at the way these things are done. I'm gonna defend. We're not going to defend the second movie because no one can. But I think there's a lot more about this movie that's actually seeing the crap that goes on in academia, the crap that goes on in the museum world, and that is actually being more cleverly cynical about it than you might expect.
Did you all see the story? Like my neighbor shared this with me today because she knows I do archaeology, that they found a Roman bust at a Goodwill in Austin. You were there?
I was there. Yeah, no, they brought it into the department. We had like all the faculty and we like sat down with everybody and we're like, what do we think this is? And why do we think it's this? And yeah, it's been basically in the works for like the past 2 or 3 years because of COVID. But yeah, it's...
Back us up. I need a little, because when was this? Where was I?
I don't know, Colin. I don't know where you were. So it was, oh gosh, it must have been 2018, I guess. Someone affiliated with the art history department found in a Goodwill in Austin, Texas, a marble bust and said, that looks suspiciously real. And so bought it for $34.99. It was so heavy she couldn't carry it like to her car. She like had some guy at Goodwill like help her carry it. And so that's the picture that's been going around, is this Roman bust like seat belted into a front seat. And they brought it to, we were all in the art, what's the building? Now I can't remember it, Colin. I've been gone so long.
Like, I've been gone longer.
I know, you've been gone longer. I don't know. But yeah, we were all, they put out a call. It was like, hey, we're going to talk about this. We don't know if it's real. We're going to, have a discussion. And so Rabin Taylor and Penelope Davies and some other people were there. And we just sort of talked through like our opinions on what in the world we think this is. And they did a lot of research, and they found that it was probably looted by, I think, a World War II soldier stationed somewhere in Germany, who took it from maybe a bombed out like palace that was sort of made to look like a Roman Pompeian building or something like that. And it's going to be returned there in a year. So it's going to be on display at the museum in San Antonio, I think, for about a year. And then 2023, it's going back.
All right.
So it's a really cool story.
What family member was like, yeah, just get rid of that. Take it to Goodwill. Like,
right?
Like, we don't want it. That giant paperweight.
Yeah, you too can now be an Indiana Jones by going to your local Goodwill and see what you find.
Yeah, but I think that's like such a great story of like making a lot of the right decisions of like, oh, wow, this looks suspiciously real, and let's talk with my colleagues, and like let's do a lot of research, and actually like repatriating something that was looted. I think it's such a great story because it's been, I think, going around, and a lot of people love that image. I think it's so cool, that Roman bust seatbelted in that car. Yeah.
Can I jump back to Raiders and ask a question that I've always wondered about?
Yep.
Was anyone else intrigued by the fact that the French archaeologist was Jewish, and that he then led the ritual, and that the Nazis were all about, I mean, the underbelly of that kind of stuff was like, that was pretty crazy. And as a kid, I knew that the Nazis were anti-Jewish, and this Jewish ritual, the guy whose face will be melted off says, the Nazi guy. But so there's some distaste there for it. But it's super interesting that that there's cleverness enough that the archaeologist is like trying to walk 2 or 3 different identities with his code shifting of how it fits into, as a mercenary, which is very archaeological too. How many mercenaries like or spies or CIA type people like double dip in these realms, and that was really interesting to me too.
Well, but the best part about the Ark being the thing everyone's coveting is like Hitler wants the Ark, but the Ark is like the symbol of Judaism, but he doesn't hates Jewish people, but then he has to turn to that's the most powerful object he can turn to, and then it is also the destruction then of all the evil Nazis. So it's very very apropos there.
I do love that. Absolutely.
I was just going to say that, I've been talking to Rwandan genocide with my students for the last few weeks. So, but with that idea is that a lot of, the harm done to people is because of the power you fear they possess. And so that's not too surprising, actually, that Hitler ultimately is, speaking to fear of what Jewish people possess, especially with this powerful object, but he also wants to possess it for himself. Like, that's really, that's intriguing.
So I have like so many thoughts about this, and like one is like you could, I think, just again like do a whole reading of this movie as like a Jewish revenge fantasy, right? It's because literally where Nazis are destroyed by like the most sacred artifact. And also, it's a thing, one of those things that like I didn't really realize as a kid. Like as a kid, I was thinking like, yeah, Egypt, it's all Egypt, but I didn't realize that it was like a specifically. It was like they're actually looking for a Jewish artifact that was looted from Jerusalem and then brought to Egypt, which I also have questions about that. But yeah, I think like, and it seems very on brand for Spielberg. Where it's like, I just want to like destroy Nazis with Jewish artifacts. And I think he's pretty upfront about that. He's like, yeah, that's kind of my vibe.
It's very cathartic.
Yes.
You're like, yes.
I was impressed with all of the ways he managed to show excruciating death, but in like a multitude of ways of melting, exploding, and like a combination of the two. Like
when I was a kid, my parents didn't let me watch that scene. That was the part where I had to like leave and go into the other room so I didn't see the guy's face get melted off until I was like 20.
It's totally why do you have to close your eyes, and how does he know that, and how stupid is that part? Just close your eyes, Marion. Don't look at it no matter what happens. And then they get to
read his Bible
because they didn't look at the face of God. I mean, come on, that's stupid.
He read his Bible. You can't look at it, can't touch it. He knows.
Yeah. But he doesn't touch. There's actually, I learned in the Bible, there's a story about the ark where like they're moving the ark and some guy like it's wobbling and some guy goes to steady it and he just dies on the spot for touching it.
Actually, so I'm teaching a class on Jerusalem right now, and we just read that scene. It's David trying to bring the ark into the city, and he tries it once. I think his name's like Hosea or something, touches it, and he like melts and dies. And then they're like, oh, okay, like bring it back, like go put it in its tent again. And then they try to bring it back like, the second time. Then God's like, okay, you can bring it back now. Like now it's finally okay.
Wow. I have a thought, but I actually just want to bring it back to Kara's sort of original question about Belloc. And like Belloc is kind of one of the more interesting characters because like you're right, like he is this interesting kind of the dark, he says something to Indiana Jones at one point where he's like, you're 2 steps away from becoming me. He's this mercenary. I mean, presumably he's a traitor in more than one sense where he's like working for the Nazis despite being French and also Jewish. He's also a traitor to the spirit of archaeology, at least as sort of if Jones embodies it, which as we've talked about is, flawed in its own ways. But yeah, Belloc is kind of this, I don't know. I guess he's right. In just a sort of standard hero's journey kind of screenplay 101, like, right, he's the shadow or the inversion of Indiana Jones. And whereas Indiana Jones is rugged and everyman, Belloc is also genteel and refined, right? He's
Yeah,
they never mention that he has a PhD. One wonders.
I had another sort of like lighter question on this subject, which is there's, I think, talking modern about the importance of nemesis in your own sort of personal and professional life, which is, do you have any Bellocs? Like, who is your nemesis?
I can't name them on this podcast.
I was like, Colin, what kind of question is that?
This is an important. I think nemesis are important.
Everyone has them.
You
Yes.
have to go bleep, bleep, bleep.
Yeah.
Yes, if you say anything that you want bleeped out, I can do that after the fact, so that's fine.
I mean, yeah, when you work in the university world, the academic world, and you're working with discoveries and publication and students, and there's so much competition, especially as higher education is carpet bombed from the inside out, there's no question that you're going to create or make or have enemies, whether you want them or not. And I would just encourage everyone, like Indiana Jones does, just use them to spur you on.
That's a good, yeah.
If you don't have enemies, you're not doing it right.
Fair.
There you go.
When those enemies are Nazi sympathizers, then you're probably doing it right.
That's what I always tell Kara.
I was just gonna say, I think of it like my relationship with my little brother, where it's like, I love you, but like competition is happening and it's on. Like,
Well, there's like healthy competition, right?
Mhm.
But then I think sometimes it veers into like, I feel like UCLA has a really good atmosphere amongst its grad students, but I've heard terrible stories from other grad programs about like, sabotage and people like purposely trying to like knock other people down,
hide
and steal
books,
things,
stuff like
take
that.
their ideas, hide books, like all this kind of stuff, which is just terrible.
We just had an episode about The Emperor's Club, which is a movie about a sort of like prep school for Roman historians. And we talked about this a lot. Yeah, that sort of inherently competitive nature of that some academics foster, which is bad for the soul.
But I feel like that has so much to do with this like ego of like, I'm the Indiana Jones, right? And
why does he need all these chicks? Why? What is he lacking in himself? So much
I think the answer gets into the third movie, and that's his father's love.
Yes, exactly.
True.
He didn't get hugged enough.
So I need to watch 2 more movies to fully understand the psyche of Indiana Jones, which I've seen the opening of the third one to see how, like, we learned that he hates snakes, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
That he hammed it up for hating snakes. I'm like, I can tell that man just cannot with snakes.
The snake scene is fascinating if you go and you watch all the behind the scenes footage, because originally, like, the initial problem was there just weren't enough snakes. Like, they had 2,000 snakes or something like that, and Spielberg, like, when I pan out, you can see spots that don't have snakes on them. So, yeah, it's like more snakes, and he sent somebody had to, like, go out and did like a midnight run. They were filming in England, and somebody like went in, they found more snakes in some place in Denmark, and they brought in. So the numbers vary, but there's something like 6,000 or 7,000 snakes that they used.
That's too many snakes.
And the worst,
poor animals.
And
5,099 too many snakes.
Yeah, Karen Allen, who plays Marion, she had it the worst because she talks about, like, in interviews where she's like, well, like, Harrison Ford got to wear, like, he's wearing like boots and trousers, and I'm in like the dress and I'm barefoot, and the snakes, and the snakes are all right there.
But really, we have to talk about that scene too, because the walls that are decorating this temple space are just so wrong. They're egregiously wrong, and it just makes me crazy. Why can't you hire a consultant? Why can't you hire the right consultant to get this right? Because there's tomb scenes or temple. I mean, where are they, and why is it underground?
It
makes no sense. The mummies are cool.
I have a great story about this, like, well of souls or whatever. So when you go to when I went to Tanis for the first time, real Tanis in the Delta of Egypt, you walk around and there is like a pit at the back end of it. And all the tour guides are like, this is where they filmed the movie. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. And they're like, you want to go in it? And I was like, yeah. And so we climbed down into it. And I'm like standing there and I'm like, Harrison Ford was here. There's like snakes everywhere. Like, this is so cool. And then, like, I looked it up afterwards and I was like, yeah, they didn't film here at all. Like, they're just like lying to get all the tourists.
Yeah, they filmed in Tunisia. Yeah. They do. Yeah.
I was like, what? I was like, you lied to me.
That's amazing.
It was a pit, and it was in real Tanis, so it's where it was purporting to be. So,
I mean, the time period and stuff is right if you're talking about Exodus, like, material, the timing. You know, you're going to put it in a 22nd dynasty city.
Shashank's bringing it back, I guess.
Shishak of the Bible, or Shawshank, the first of Egyptian lineage, is going to be the guy that takes it from Jerusalem and then puts it in Tanis. So, you know, they did that kind of research. That's fine. It's not like the mummy where there's like 5 canopic jars. Is that right?
Yeah.
So, you know, just some of the imagery is a little off, but like the map room is kind of cool, where you've got Tanis all laid out and the different temples and everything. It's cool that there's a medallion and light comes down. And then, that's awesome. Seems great.
So, yeah, I think the timeline the movie says is something like 980. I don't know if they named the pharaoh or if that, I assumed that was all just
no, it's actually a legit theory that people because Shashank goes up there and we stop hearing about the Ark in the temple. Most people think it's all the Babylonians when they come sack the first temple that they took it, but there is, in the passage that talks about Shashank coming up, he takes stuff from the temple. So
okay,
maybe, or the Babylonians or the Romans or the Assyrians, someone took it.
Was Tanis ever a lost city?
No. We always, everything that is ancient Egypt is kind of lost, right? And has had to have been rediscovered in some way, shape, or form. So in some ways, yes, but it fits. That part's on point. And I'm so glad you're teaching Jerusalem right now, Jordan, so you know all this stuff.
We just went over it in midterm.
Oh, one part that I hate is when Salah goes, Cairo, city of the living, and you look at it and you go, no, it's not. You're like in Morocco or something, and we can totally tell, because Cairo does not look like that. Cairo wouldn't have looked like that then. Cairo had boulevards and big apartment buildings when he would have been there. It would have been a completely different place. And so Cairo is primitivized, if you like. Nothing against Morocco, but it would have looked very, very different in the late 30s for certain.
And I had another question also, if this is, again, just sort of fishing around of like, is there any sort of actuality? And because like you mentioned the wall carvings in the temple, and like there's even famously like a little R2D2 in one of those, if you look, like right when they're lifting the ark out. And we've talked about this a lot about movies having to do set in ancient Greece and Rome, where they just kind of throw it all together. Anything that is visually evocative of the cultural perception of whatever it is, Egypt, Greece. And I assume that's basically just is what's going on in this movie, right? You get sort of profile statues, Anubis statues.
Yep. Yeah, they just collapse it.
Jordan and I work on a lot of consulting together on many projects, actually, and we can see how it's done. You know, the artists will pick up pattern books and different things, do some Google image searches, and they're like, oh, I like this, and then they just use it, and then they show it to you. You're like, no, that's wrong, and your whole story is wrong, and this is all wrong, and then they don't know how to go back and deal with it. Some people know to work early enough with the consultants to deal with it. Like Jordan has helped with, like what kinds of consulting work have you done, Jordan, to get it right?
I mean, I'm mainly helping with costumes. That's what my PhD research looks at. But even like set design, you know, things like this. Yeah, getting even spoken word, how certain phrases would sound, but, you know, just getting things. Ancient Egypt is thousands of years of history, and everyone kind of just makes it into this one entity, and just being like, okay, so you're setting it in the New Kingdom, like here's what would be there. There aren't pyramids in like Thebes, right? You know, like knowing your spatial geography of where things are, and time and space, and okay, here's what like technologies they would have, and here's what they would be dressing like, and the foods they'd be eating, and maybe the names that were popular.
Mm-hmm. That's why these movies are so much better, The Mummy and Raiders, because they're not set in ancient times. They're set in the 30s and 40s or 20s, and it's just easier to do that right.
Because I would say, like, I think we talked about this. We actually just happen chance our Egypt and pop culture episode is actually coming out Monday. And when I was doing the edits for it, the only Egypt movie that takes place in ancient Egypt that we both liked was Prince of Egypt, which is a cartoon. So they could just draw everything how they wanted it. Right. But like everything else is bad. Like no one has done it right.
Yeah.
What's been the worst, the most egregious?
Exodus, Gods and Kings is really bad. And then Gods of Egypt is really bad too.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Gods of Egypt is...
It looked so bad.
Yeah.
But Exodus is trying to be legit, and he's wearing like the queen's headdress. You're like, what? You put him in a dress. Not that there's anything wrong with that, and wouldn't it be nice if more men put on dresses to gain power, which they don't do. But, you know, they put him in the moot vulture headdress, Christian Bale. I'm like, what the hell is going on? Ridiculous. Trying to be serious and you get it that wrong. Gods of Egypt is just a farce and it's stupid. So
yeah, and just like the casting of like white British men it's just like not even trying to.
Gods of Egypt is a strong contender for worst movie ever made, just on like many levels of just like, you know, script, acting. Like it's almost like you could almost use it as like a case study of like what not to do in a movie. But the question I remember was being of just other sort of points of like historicity, if we could call it that. My question was about the medallion, or the headpiece of the Staff of Ra, and like there's writing on it, or they say something. Is there anything going on there, or is that just?
Yeah, the writing looks. What is it? Is it like hieratic sort of writing?
That's what I'm trying to look it up right now.
Let me pull this thing up.
We'll do a thing like anytime we're watching a movie and then they cut to like there's a bit of Latin or ancient Greek. I usually like we'll do a pause and a freeze frame and I'll like try to, and like sometimes it's more right than not. Sometimes it's just gobbledygook.
Like Linear B and Atlantis. Yeah. That was
yes.
Fun. Most times it's gobbledygook and they just are throwing like random hieroglyphs together. So I'm looking at it from like the Indiana Jones wiki, and it looks like it's trying to be the Horus Falcon, Kara, or like the vulture, you know, wings out, but it's like looks more like a duck, and it looks like it has Greek on it. It's not Egyptian.
It looks just like a duck, and then the letters, it's alphabetic. It looks like Phoenician.
You know what it is?
And I see a shin, and like
it's
Coptic
Hebrew
or something.
It's Hebrew.
And so the guy they bring it to is meant to be an Egyptian Jewish man. And he's not reading Egyptian; he's reading Hebrew. Yeah,
that's so cool, actually.
Because like in the movie, the back of the medallion has like the instructions for how high the staff should be to be able to reveal the ark. So it has to be Hebrew or somehow connected to, like, why would whoever brought it to Egypt, like, know that? Like, so to me, it's, the context is like Jewish people brought it to Egypt to hide it away and then left a trail for its rediscovery at some point.
This is, yeah, kind of, and I guess where the movie probably gets a little hand-wavy, but the movie kind of does also allude to, like, in addition to the Nazis or the Americans or whoever trying to come in and sort of take the ark or something like that, but there's like, this was a similar thing, that even like the way pharaohs were doing this, or later like the Romans or the Greeks or whoever, you know, like these sort of, there's layers of conquest and taking things, moving them around, things like stuff like that, and that's already happening in this. You know, the ark is like one of these pieces that gets moved around. That was a very muddled thought that I'm kind of...
I mean, I have a real problem with this. Why is it in Hebrew? Why are they trying to hide it for the Egyptians? You know, what if the Egyptians are the ones that stole it and then they put it in the map, or they put it in the pit, the Well of Souls, and then they hide it and make the map room? Why would they create the piece that helps them find it? It doesn't make any sense.
I have 2 tidbits. So based off the wiki, it is written in Paleo Hebrew and it can be read. So we'd have to like ask Bill from UCLA, Bill Schneidewin, who does all the language stuff. So apparently it says like, and one Amma, the biblical unit above, and honor Yahweh and the tabernacle or something like that. So it is written in the language. The other thing about how this maybe could fit within the biblical literature is that when the Babylonians came and sacked, a lot of people like went to Egypt to get away from them because, you know, they forced them into exile. So it's like maybe the priesthood could have taken the ark with them, escaped out the back door, and went and hid it somewhere in Egypt under the Egyptians not knowing. But I don't know how they would have gotten to Tanis and like hid it within this royal enclosure.
A lot of the like logic of these kinds of like just set pieces, right? Where like we want a set piece where he walks through this temple and there's pressure plates that shoot out darts and there's a boulder that rolls or something like that, which is like, why would you ever build a place like this, right? Like, why would you build a map room? Like, it makes no sense that you would do it this way. It only makes sense if you built it with the idea that some Indiana Jones is going to come along in 2000 or whatever years. You know, I think about this like a lot of times, like it's like the logic of like in video games or Dungeons and Dragons where like you're going through the dungeon and it's like, why would there just be a bunch of rooms with traps and like an ogre walking around? Like, what? Or even like they make a joke about this in The Lost City, which I have yet to edit our episode on, where they're like, why would this room be filled with snakes? Like, do they live here? Who put them here?
Snakes die.
Yeah.
I will say the part I like about that scene that does actually scream archaeology at me is like delicately walking up a feature or around a wall or something. I'm like, yeah, that is exactly what it looks like when you're trying to navigate between trenches and trying to get to the spot you need to be. So like,
I thought you were going to say the part where he knocks over the statue through the wall. But
yeah, that too.
You've never done that? You never just...
I remember when I was working in a museum that they were like, because you're always afraid, you know, of dropping something. And they were saying, like, you haven't, like, at some point in everyone's museum work life, like, you will drop something and break it. Yeah. Like, everyone has, like, that one story of, like, dropping and breaking something, and hopefully it's just not...
I've never done it.
That precious.
I've never done it, Jordan.
you would drop and break a coffin, so that'd be
I was there when Neil, husband number 1, let him not be named again, was he almost dropped a coffin. He dropped a camera on a coffin. Almost. He didn't. And I remember the curator was there and looked at him and looked at me, and it was just, oh my God.
I have like sort of 2 stories. I think I've told them on this show, but one was I was in Italy and we were looking. It was, I forget the name of the town, and it was like a small little like local museum, and they had a sarcophagus, like a late antique sarcophagus, and there was like the top was cracked such that you could actually look down and you could see there were still bones in there, and we were up on like there's like you can see it at the ground floor, you can like see the side, and then you can go to like a sort of balcony area and like look down on top. And while we were all like looking over, somebody like had their notebook, basically like a page, like some pages like fell out of, or they like dropped their notebook and all these pages went everywhere, and we all like collectively held our breath as we watched this one piece of paper like float down towards the sarcophagus, and we were like, is it gonna go in the sarcophagus? Like, and it just barely missed, but there was like a, you know, time stood still for like probably about 3 seconds as we watched this piece of paper like almost go inside a
I
sarcophagus.
was in a hot air balloon that almost hit an obelisk at Karnak.
What?
Yes, that happened. Cleared it right.
Oh my god.
I have a lot of follow-up questions about this. What was going on in the hot air balloon?
I was there for a documentary, and they had a film crew in there, and it was, and I
Too
was meant to
heavy.
be talking while we're looking at stuff and whatever, and they almost hit the obelisk.
Oh my god.
They were trying to get as low to the temple as they could. So this was bad. It was bad.
Wow.
I just have the story of the student who put a pickaxe through a human skull twice for a good measure. Luckily, kind of just scooped the skull cap out, so wasn't the worst, but it wasn't great.
Pulled the Buster Bluth, just kind of hammer right through the skull.
Yep.
It makes me so uncomfortable every time you tell that story, Christy.
I'm so sorry. So I don't know where we're at exactly, but I had seen an Indiana Jones movie before this one, and it was Crystal Skull, which was Ancient Aliens. My dad's obsessed with Ancient Aliens, which is very, very hard to deal with
Oh, that's
sometimes.
awful.
We're getting David Anderson on next week to talk about that movie.
Great.
But it brings me to the ending because Indy is sulking because they're being told well, you can't put it in the museum. It's we have men looking at it, and it gets boxed up to a crate and put in a giant warehouse. And I turned to Andy, who's watching with me, is that Area 51, or is this basically voicing a conspiracy that the U.S. government is collecting powerful antiquities for future use? What is happening there?
One of the other fantasies of this movie is in addition, we talked about sort of the Jewish revenge fantasy, is that it's a sort of simplistic moral tale where the American forces are sort of unequivocally and uncomplicatedly. I mean, there's a little bit of complication at the end where Harrison Ford is the top men, and it's better than, I guess, the Nazis. But yeah, the role of the government in all of this.
I think it's a very anti-authoritarian
it's in their safe
film.
hands.
Mm-hmm.
This is very anti-authoritarian. The Nazis don't come off well. The United States government and the CIA don't come off well. Anybody who's in any sort of organization. This is a movie that is about how noble and brave you are when you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you do things independently and alone, and you take your own lead and you don't listen to anybody else. He is the anti-hero, and of course he ends up alone and sad because of it. But yes, this is the price he must pay.
And we've talked about we talked earlier about the myth, of being proven right, because that's really the appeal of this fantasy, right? Is that Jones is proven right, or that you could go out, everybody disbelieves your theory, but you find the thing, you uncover the lost treasure, you find the Ark, the Grail, the whatever, the lost city of Zed, and prove all the haters wrong. And that's really also the appeal of this kind of fantasy, right? Is Indiana Jones is yeah, he's a libertarian hero.
It also recalls to me the mess of museum basements and how in a lot of cases there are hidden gems down there that everyone's forgotten about, right? Because it's been maybe 100 years since they were put down there. And then at some point someone goes, rooting around and finds something great and amazing that has been lost since that time.
Yeah, like at Museo Egizio in Turin, they found, right, Jordan? They found the leg from Nefertari's tomb, and
Nefertari.
They're like, this is Nefertari's calf and foot.
Holy cow!
Yeah, they have her left leg or something, from the knee down.
That's so wild.
I had a revelation when I first went to Greece, and they took us down into the basement of in the Agora. There's the Stoa, and they have a basement there where they keep most of the finds. And there's just racks and racks and racks and racks and racks of vases and pots and to the point where it's there's just so many. And at a certain point, it's just another black figureware vase. It's not really anything. There's just we just need to put it somewhere. But there's so much of that stuff out there.
Egypt, the government of Egypt is only just correcting a lot of this now. Since the revolution in 52, much of what has been discovered and then cannot leave Egypt stays in storage magazines on site. And storage magazines at some sites just, they keep getting built bigger and they're huge. And at places like Saqqara or Tanis or Karnak Temple, massive storage magazines. And only recently, with the building of the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization and now the GEM, the Grand Egyptian Museum, are they opening up these storage magazines and putting things that have long been crated up and invisible to our eyes out into public sight. So, these things, again, I'm going to say that they're bringing up actualities. It may be over the top in some ways, but they're bringing up actualities from our academic museum worlds.
That makes me wonder with the fact that these government institutions, the CIA, the Nazi army, and everything like that, as their interference in this being seen as bad, is that being tied to like certain laws? Like, I know this is before NAGPRA comes out, but like certain laws that are limiting antiquities trade, and is like a pushback against that.
Well, I was just having this thought experiment in my head where, if like, what if this happened? Like, okay, what if the Ark did go to the U.S. and is like sitting in a bunker somewhere, and like someone finds it? Like, is Egypt going to call for its repatriation, or like is Israel going to call for its repatriation because it was originally Israel's? Like, how's this going to go down in like that messy fight? Or like U.S. would be like, well, it came here before the 1970s, so it's kosher and we can keep it. Like, who gets this Ark now? And that would just be like the Elgin Marbles type of time, like a billion. Or Nefertiti, the bust of Nefertiti.
Yeah, is it better to just keep it hidden away, so it's like we're like not bringing us all into this huge mess?
But isn't that cool, the way they focus on how we fetishize these objects? Now, this particular object can kill, right, if you look
right
at it. But the Rosetta Stone is in the Nefertiti bust in Berlin. I mean, these things are so fetishized. The amount of people and I just had a bar fight with two colleagues who will go unnamed at the Egyptology conference that we just had in Irvine, California. And I'm like, yeah, of course they should send the Rosetta Stone and Nefertiti bust back. And they're like, no way, that's wrong. And I'm like, why is it wrong? Wow. And so we're, not coming to blows, but it was, we hold dear to these things and we claim them and we attach our own morality, and objects have great power over us. And I like that. I like this new materialist lens through which we are looking in this movie of 1981.
Interesting.
Well, and ironically, because I remember it's been a while since I've seen National Treasure, but like the Smithsonian storage, like that was my next, like, is it Area 51? And my partner's like, it wasn't set up yet. I'm like, okay, Smithsonian warehouse, like underground warehouse,
like Fort Knox.
Something,
all the gold or something.
And the irony is that I think the Smithsonian officially just announced that they're like revamping their repatriation system too. So I'm like, maybe they do. Maybe they have the Ark and Spielberg knew something.
There is also a kind of another just reality to it, in that World War II being a huge catalyst for a lot of art and antiquities getting confiscated, stolen, traded. There's all sorts of stories of different sort of art pieces that were, and like the paper trail that kind of goes missing, and World War II is being like a huge catalyst for, and we talked about the Roman bust a second ago.
Yeah. Well, and some things that are like still missing, right? Like that are probably in somebody's basement, locked away, private collection, which is like, what is the difference between some rich dude's private collection and a warehouse, a bunker in the Smithsonian? It's like, it's amounts to the same thing.
You have to remember, why is the Mona Lisa in the Louvre? Who took it and when? And what does all of that mean? It should be given back to Italy. But when and how and to whom? And but it, it's in France now. Yeah. And when you go and see it and you see like 500 people crowded around this little painting that's just tiny, you're like, oh my God, talk about fetishization. It's
absolutely.
Well, and like, I talk to my students a lot, like being very frustrated about the British Museum, not even for the big items that's like, that should go back, but like, I have a stamped lamp, a molded lamp at Ganja Vecchio with a particular sex scene. And I go to the British Museum and I see that same one. I'm like, maybe this is where it was manufactured. Where did it come from? And the answer of the British Museum is like, maybe Naples. And I'm like, damn it. And I think that's not just I'm so interested in how, You know, that golden idol at the very beginning of the movie, literally no context about it. Like, why is it being sought out? What is its value? What is its meaning? And that could be understand in the temple space, but it is removed and then stolen, and we never see it again, museum or otherwise.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that idol has complete power over the people. They all bow down and are super afraid.
Exactly.
On the line of fetishization, and even going hand into sort of the period piece of the fetishization of like precious metals, jewelry. We care so much about the stuff if it's made of emeralds or whatever, which is like the twist that they pull in Last Crusade, where it's like the Holy Grail is actually just a wooden cup or something like that. Like, you know, that's
Which I love.
Spoiler.
I do like that.
Sorry.
I've seen that scene, so it's okay.
Or I mean, you go with the Da Vinci Code, where it's actually a woman.
Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, the allure of, because also they even just so much early archaeology was just trying to find the more impressive gold thing, right? I mean, to the exclusion of other probably very informative works made out of, you know, terracotta or whatever.
Or I think about human remains as well. It's like sort of the, you know, sorry, I bring it up in every single.
Well, no, I texted Eli when I was watching Last Crusade, because it's the part where he reaches into a little, like, what do you would call it, like
a cyst tomb.
Yeah,
something.
and he just grabs the skeleton, rips the skeleton out, like presumably from the Middle Ages, and turns the skeleton's femur into a torch. And I was like, Eli would lose her gourd watching this.
No, and I was like, I vividly remember that, and I absolutely am just like, why would you do this?
I mean, how many stories do we have, Kara, of, you know, mummies just being used as like firewood because they had so many of them? Or
Did people
like
used to like eat mummies or something crazy like that?
Oh yeah, mumia.
Yeah, mumia was a pharmaceutical, and it was ground up mummy, and you would buy powdered mumia and take it as a cure-all. Mumia and mummy brown was also used to make pigment. Pretty late.
Oh my gosh.
And mummies were used for firewood, and crappy coffins were used for firewood. There's so much of this stuff coming out of your ears that it was used in the ways that were most practical at the time.
Or even with Rose's stuff, where she only has the skulls, because back then they only kept the skulls for like creepy eugenics type stuff.
Yeah.
But they just got rid of all the bodies, so you can't tell the cause of death or other things about the bodies, because all you have is like the skulls.
Yes.
But even like Howard Carter, right? He wasn't finding enough gold or stuff, even though he found a lot of, you know, archaeological knowledge. But it was Lord Carnarvon was like, if you don't find me something like good, like I'm going to cut off my funding. So
I've heard stories of digs that will go unmentioned, but they're in Crete, but where they expected a sort of donor or a wealthy individual who was visiting and wanted to do some digging with their child or whatever. So they're like, we're pretty sure there's probably something good in this room over here. So like nobody touch it for a few weeks. And so when they come, we'll let them dig over there, and they have a very high chance of finding something. And then that means I'm making the money symbol with my fingers right now.
At least they didn't like bury something like on purpose. At least they just were like guessing something was there.
This happens all the time in our world. You can't imagine all these live TV specials that used to be the thing, particularly in the aughts. And, you know, they would find things on live television. At it.
Well, I know they've got one with William Shatner that, like, some people were pushing back against in our field, thankfully, and just being like, listen, because I think it was called Unexplained Mysteries. I'm like, they're not unexplained. Get some archaeologists to explain it.
Yeah, if they're unexplained, it's because we have incomplete information. That's okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. All those Nat Geo and History Channel, they're so bad. And I feel sad because when I was growing up, there was good ones on like Science Channel, Kara stuff when I was in, I won't disclose my age. But when I was growing up, like watching Kara stuff, watching other really cool, like actually historically accurate and well-researched documentaries that just don't exist nowadays. So I feel bad for...
They're coming back. Because people are starting to do more low-budget documentaries, old school talking head style things, like Dan Snow's History Hit. Those are good.
Like so I feel like it's pivoted to podcasts.
I
If
was-
you want to get like actually interesting history stuff, it's all podcasts now.
I was gonna ask like that, and also YouTube too, or like, you know,
Yes.
someone could do a YouTube channel that fills that niche, which is why a place like the History Channel is scrambling, you know, or they went down the Ancient Aliens route, you know, hard or something like that.
Real hard. I remember because I've done ground penetrating radar, and I just remember randomly turning it because I was in a hotel, and it's like, I don't have cable anymore, so let's see what turns on. It's like, oh, they're using ground penetrating radar, and they're like, it's like, we're looking for human remains, and here they are, and it's like, here's this bone, we're gonna test the DNA, and they pick up the bone, and I'm like, that's not even human. And they're like, and like later the narrator is like, we tested the DNA, it didn't match. I'm like, was it even human?
It was a sheep.
I was gonna say that one show about a money pit there, they just keep digging further down, and I'm like, there's no treasure, there's no Blackbeard's treasure, like you're just digging a giant hole into the earth and it keeps flooding. You're just like wasting money just digging this giant asshole in like Nova Scotia or something.
A literal
And
money
they just,
pit.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Exhausting.
So we just hit the hour 10 mark, and so we can probably think about sort of wrapping things up. But before that, I just want to ask: are there any particular scenes or characters or moments that we haven't hit on yet that people really wanted to make sure saw the light of day?
I will say there was a fight scene in the market before Marion is put into the basket. And like Indy's doing like real choreography, and she's just picking up a metal pan and like slowly thunking guys with it.
I thought you were going to talk about where he just shoots the
gun.
swords guy.
I mean, that's great too.
fighting.
And I know that is a reference to Star Wars in particular, because it's like the question of who shot first, and like,
Well,
Do
actually,
you know the full story behind
because
this?
he was just hungover and he didn't want to do the fight scene.
oh,
Well, I heard he had food poisoning or something, or dysentery.
Oh, that's even worse.
Yeah, and because he in interviews, they're little. Spielberg and Harrison Ford are a little. They go back and forth, and it's slightly different, but because of like who came up with the idea. But basically, the gist is Spielberg, when they were filming in Tunisia, Spielberg just brought all of his own food in like cans or something like that. Harrison Ford describes it like he just brought like cans of SpaghettiOs or whatever. So he didn't get sick, but most of the cast and crew got sick while they were filming there.
That's archaeologically, like, that's accurate.
yep.
Yeah. A friend of mine dug in Morocco for a thing, and that was her takeaway was.
Yep.
So Harrison Ford had like horrible, you know, like IBS or something, and he was like, I can only be on set for like maybe an hour before I got a like bathroom emergency. So he goes to Spielberg and he's just like, can we just shoot this guy? And Spielberg, when Spielberg says it, he kind of makes it seem like it was his own idea, but he was like, yeah, that actually sounds fun. And so apparently though, it's like that poor guy like rehearsed a whole big sword fight. But then when they initially on the first take, he did like a 30-second death scene where he like goes down on one knee and screams and writhes and flips over, and like they had to like talk him down. They're like, no, just like fall over. But yeah.
What's hilarious about that is that in my Orientalism class in undergrad, that's the scene he showed as peak Orientalism was all the, you know, primitive natives with their knives, and he has, you know, he takes out 10 of them versus this one white guy with a gun. Right. And then so it comes across super Orientalist, even though it wasn't ever meant to be depicted that way.
But it's a colonialist statement too, right? You just come in with your guns and you're able to get away with a whole lot more. So
absolutely.
Any other particular sort of scenes? I have one sign-off question before.
I mean, I think we kind of touched upon like the arc, like melting everyone. That was like fun and cathartic.
So good. Mm-hmm. I've always loved the airplane fight scene where Marion is trapped in the cockpit and Indiana Jones is trying to fight the huge German. And
Pat Roach, he's actually in like, he plays like 3 roles in every Indiana Jones movie. He's also in the bar fight. He's in the bar fight scene. He's the big guy in the bar fight scene. He's just like a staple so they get Pat Roach. And apparently that scene, I just learned, was like mostly improvised, where they just went out there for like 3-4 days and just kind of like worked out different ideas. And like him getting chopped up by the propeller was like not in the original draft. It like came to them on the fly.
I love it.
And Harrison Ford apparently really wanted to bite somebody in a fight and throw sand in their face.
I mean, Marion's pretty badass, right?
Mhm.
Always.
Yeah.
Using her sexuality to get what she can, and then hitting people when that works better. So I and drinking, like,
I loved that scene actually.
but not getting drunk, because she would never. You don't do that. It's not cool. We don't slur. We don't stumble. We can just drink.
Because that even her character is almost in the movies that this movie is kind of evoking, like the 30s and 40s serials, that character would be a straight up damsel in distress, right? She'd be in a sort of red silk dress in the jungle or whatever, like getting rescued. Yeah, Jordan's making faces. And so, to make her, I think it was maybe an inspired decision to make her this like sort of hard drinking, fist fighting, smashing over your bottle's head.
Scrappy.
And
She's scrappy. She's scrappy.
Yeah. I will say I had one major hang up involving Marion, but it wasn't about Marion necessarily herself, where like Indy thinks she's dead, and I can't remember his name, but he's like, oh, get over it, it'll be fine. And then like later when she's back and he's like, he's found the pirate ship for them to escape on, he's like, they are like family, you take care of them or I'll hear about it. And then she like gives him a gratuitous kiss, and I'm like, dude, this guy literally gave zero about you. He does not deserve that kiss.
Yeah.
Okay, so my last question for everybody is, so for Indiana Jones, his big automatic nope is snakes. What's yours? If you're digging, what's the thing you absolutely are like, you see it when you're in your trench and you're like, this, I'm out?
I'm not an archaeologist. I'm an art historian and social historian, but really it's pottery. I have no understanding of it. I don't know why people draw it or saw it in half. I don't know how they typologize it. It all looks exactly the same unless there's painting on it, and then maybe, and this means we just all have our skill sets, and this is not mine.
Late in my grad school career, I had to realize that I might have missed my calling as actually maybe a ceramicist, because like they put me in a basement in Niagara, and I just like making joins for me was like I was in heaven.
That is fun.
Like it was just Lego. I'm a big Lego guy. There's a Lego Millennium Falcon in the closet, on the other side of this camera, and just like, and so pottery is like making those joints, and I like held it up to the chart. I'm like 460, and I remember the professor. She was like, "Yeah, you're pretty good at this." I'm like, "Man, maybe I should have done this instead of what I ended up doing, which was weirder." But
my husband's a potter. That's number 2. It's the good one.
Jordan.
Well, I'll speak from experience. So the scariest things that happened when being on a dig were when I was digging in the Delta in northern Egypt. There was these tiny, tiny, tiny little scorpions. I think they said they were like baby scorpions, which are more poisonous than adult scorpions apparently. And they were like translucent, so you could barely see them. Unlike a snake or something that's kind of big, you could maybe see it coming. Though I don't like things in masses, so the like massive snakes would definitely also very much bother me. But yeah, I would say these little tiny scorpions, and then you'd see them, and then all the boys around would come and hack it to pieces, so it was okay. Because all the teenage boys just liked hacking all the scorpions to pieces with the hose. So you would just be like, scorpion, and then it was like, like a mass came and destroyed it. So
they were protecting you, Jordan.
I bet, were they doing it to impress you?
Maybe. But also claustrophobia.
Oh.
Small spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I remember we would get a scorpion in Sicily, Christy, every now and then. But I think they're not the kind that I would be like super scared of. And they were kind of slow moving, and they're just like, okay, just get out of my way. Just go away. In Romania, there are these toads that like crawl into the trench at night, and they like burrow into the ground. And so when you're like troweling, you'll just suddenly hit a toad and it like jumps out. And I'm like, I don't care. Like, I like frogs, like it's fine, but I usually have to like rescue like 5 of them, and like carrying 5 slimy, dirty toads like out to the field. I'm like, I don't want to do this. I don't like this. But I think my actual nope would be a cockroach. Colin knows of my feelings about cockroaches. Not that I've ever found one in a trench, but if it's in a room, I'm leaving that room.
Yeah. When Eli and I lived in Austin together, there was a lot of cockroach incidents.
I grew up in Texas. It's just the way. It is the way. You just deal with the cockroaches. You guys, come on.
No, No.
I guess I've got like two weird scenarios. My very first dig was actually in Washington State, and it was a mammoth dig. And it was very interesting because like we were taking out the bulks. We were like the very last season to be working on it. And like everyone knew that there is a layer of, it was almost like cement, and what it was solidified cicada burrows that you literally just had to strong arm your way through. But the problem is like right below that layer is where the mammoth bones were. And so like you literally are just full force, and then all of a sudden bone would explode. You're like, no,
My mammoth.
how did this happen? And then my experience at Ganja Vecchio, because the site that we dig at, it looks like a disaster, some kind of natural disaster occurred to preserve the site. And so we have occasionally found human remains where we are not expecting human remains. And the last season I was there, like we have a kitchen midden, so like animal bones everywhere. And then all of a sudden a student comes and pulls me, he's like, is this animal? And I'm like, it's not. Where did you get this? And it ended up being the worst game of like, there are human bones mixed with animal bones, just based on how whatever, like a landslide, mudslide,
Yeah.
like took out
Jumped
this
grandma
structure.
in the trash pit.
Yeah, it is like the worst game of, is it animal or is it human? And I hated it so much because I don't even look at human bones that much, just enough to be the only one on site with a bunch of undergrads to recognize the difference, maybe.
I have now that I have time to think about it, I have a better one. Dig toilets.
Yeah.
Ooh.
I agree with you 1,000%.
Oh,
Like, I'd rather just go outside.
Say it.
than
I didn't
use a
want to
dig
say
toilet.
it, and I'm glad you.
Like, I just want to just go out in nature.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want any type of like primitive toilet.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like a great way to get like hantavirus.
Yes.
No, that's no good.
All right. That sounds like a great note to end on.
Poop.
So, Jordan, Kara, thank you so much for coming on the show. We hope you enjoyed yourselves. We had a blast having you on.
Thank you.
If listeners, people want to hear more, read more from you, where can they do that?
So I think this is me. So you can listen to our podcast, Afterlives with Kara Cooney, on all good podcasting services. So whichever one you like best. We tend to drop every Monday, every 2 weeks. But there is a good backlog, so you can catch up on that. You can follow us you can sign up for our newsletter at Kara's website, which is...
KaraCooneyEgyptologist.com, I think.
Yes, that's right. And we also we just started a new Substack. So if you do Afterlives After Party, we have a new Substack where we continue the conversations that we started on the podcast, do some weekly roundups of our favorite news stories and things like that. So you can follow me on Twitter. I'm J.A. Galczynski. And you can follow Kara on Twitter as well.
Yeah, and I'm on other socials, but not as active because, some of them have become so evil, I can't handle it. And if you want to read some of my more political screeds, then you can pick up some of my trade books. The last one is called The Good Kings, and it's all about how we positivize authoritarianism as Egyptologists, and should we do that, and what can we learn about patriarchal rule from ancient Egypt and kings like Khufu or Ramses II. Why build a pyramid? Why build colossal statues? And how are we very similar to these guys? So that was the last book, and it seems to have pissed a whole lot of people off. So that's exciting.
Hey, that sounds like you're doing it right.
Yeah, exactly. What is it? You're doing it wrong if you don't have enemies. So that's cool. And we're putting. Twitter is where I hang out the most. That might now be not fun too. So
long sigh.
Yeah. But really, to find out what's going on in our heads, Jordan and I, once we start talking, we just we have a really fun time just speaking to each other very quickly and about all manner of subjects. And that's where you need to go and listen to us gab. It's very fun.
Excellent.
We have new things in the works too. So if you are a listener, stay tuned for things.
Awesome.
All right. Well, again, yeah, thank you both for coming on, and we'll hopefully, if any you ever want to come back, if there's anything you ever want to talk about, movies or Greece and Rome,
we can do Moon Knight. We just both haven't watched it completely, so maybe once the first season's over.
My embarrassing story was with their. Actually, I don't want to spoil it. Whether they find a certain.
Don't spoil the tomb. Don't spoil the tomb. It's so good.
Okay.
I had a real overthinking classicist moment of who I thought was going to be in that tomb.
Yeah.
But anyways, so yeah, thank you both again for coming on the show. We'll see you around. So bye.
Thanks so much. Bye.